Okay, so today we're going to start with Shir HaShirim. Shir HaShirim is part of a collection which are known as the five Megillot, or five scrolls. Now you might think, if you think of the word Megillah, right, or the Megillah, you think of Esther. Right? Esther is one of five books which are known as Megillot. Now, Megillot means scrolls, but it's clear that many of the biblical books were on scrolls originally. We know it best from the Torah, but actually the prophets were all on scrolls, and for a long time may have, unlike the Torah, which we always read out of a scroll in synagogue, the prophets for a long time may have been read out of scrolls. There are existing scrolls. There's synagogues that have very old scrolls in them, like, a scroll of the book of Isaiah, for example. So the word scroll really applies in general. So what these five scrolls have in common, and the reason why they were grouped together, is that they are read liturgically. They're read as part of services. We're not going to look at all of them, but we're going to look at most of them. Ironically, they were probably written on one scroll, even though they're called the five scrolls, because in general, if you could imagine taking a book with 4 or 5 chapters and putting it on one scroll, you would have maybe 2 pages of cloth, of parchment, and try to roll it. So, and we know, in fact, that books were sometimes combined and they were sometimes separated. I'll give you an example of that. The book of Isaiah, which we think about as one book, there's almost universal scholarly opinion that it was at least 2. And in fact, there were 2 prophets named Isaiah who lived at very different times, right? But things get combined into one scroll, right? And so it's hard to say, well, and they both had the name Isaiah, but one Isaiah is pre-exilic. It's before the destruction of the temple and the exile of the people. And the other one, beginning with chapter 40, is clearly post-exilic. Talks about a completely different period as the people are returning from the Babylonian exile. The first part talks about what will happen, and then the second part is, in some ways, what happened and how we reflect on it as we go back to the land of Israel. So again, they're called 5 scrolls. They were probably in one. The order of them. Oh, one more thing about 5 and why there might be 5. We know about 5 books of the Torah.
Yeah, from the diagram.
Psalms also can be divisible into 5 books. And it's really quite clear that there are 5 major sections to the book of Psalms. And so it might make sense also to have 5 short books known as the 5 Megillot, or 5 scrolls. The order of these books in the Bible was not fixed until relatively late. And so we see different variations of them. The one that we have, right, which begins with the Song of Songs, and then goes after that to the book of Ruth, the book of Lamentations, and then Kohelet, which is Ecclesiastes, and then Esther, which is the last book, really follows the cycle of the year because they are read on holidays. The first holiday of the year, biblically, is Passover, right? And then we come to Shavuot. Passover, we read the Song of Songs. Shavuot, we read Ruth. In the summer, we have Tisha B'Av, which commemorates the destruction of the temple, and the book of Lamentations is read, lamenting the destruction of the temple. We come around then to the fall when we will read the book of Ecclesiastes. And then the last one is Esther, because it's at the end of the liturgical year, right? So that's the order. Now, there were other ancient orders, for example, following the historical time frame of each work. And therefore, they might be, different. If we sort of figure out when things happened, historically, at least the way our tradition has ascribed them to happening. Either way, you start with the Song of Songs because it seems to be connected to Passover, but then it changes. Lamentations, right, which would be the third book, would come all the way later on because of the destruction of the temple, but Esther is even later. Okay, so much for that. I want to come into talking about the book of the Song of Songs in general. And what do we know about it? First thing to note about the Song of Songs, doesn't seem religious at all. It has no theology. God is not mentioned. Israel is not mentioned. It is really very, very unlike any other book of the Bible. And it doesn't even focus on the Jewish people in any way. You could look at the story of Esther, for example. God is also not mentioned explicitly in the book of Esther. One has this sense of God working behind the scenes, right? There's fasting people. Mordecai says to Esther at one point, if you don't act, deliverance will come from another place, right? There's an allusion there that we can easily read as the divine. Nothing like that in the Song of Songs. It's love poetry, and you wonder, how did this make it into the Bible? Right? And it's clear that it was not originally meant, it was not universally believed to be an appropriate part of the Bible. Doesn't mention God, doesn't mention Israel. But here's the kicker. It's erotic. The Song of Songs is real. I mean, the eroticism, it's not pornographic, right? It's all illusion. But as we'll look at it, you'll see there's a tremendous amount of eroticism, and it's earthly eroticism. This later on, and I'll talk about this, gives the rabbis a lot of trouble. What do you do with this book? So it's clear that there was a debate about whether to include the book. And the champion of that debate, right? Because we have all the books of the Bible, but all the books that were out there don't become part of the Bible. There's a process called canonization, right? Oh, this book belongs in, this book belongs out, and so on. So how does the Song of Songs get into the canon, despite the fact that it doesn't mention God, doesn't mention Israel, it's erotic? What? So at least according to Talmudic tradition, Rabbi Akiva is the great champion of the book of Esther. Akiva says, if all the books are holy, this is the holiest of them all. Not only is it profane, it's the most holy. And if someone is going to be the champion of the Song of Songs, it's not surprising in some ways that it's Akiva. Because one of the main focuses, in addition to great rabbinic scholarship and biblical interpretation and so on, one of the things we know about Akiva is that he was a champion of love. According to Akiva, the greatest commandment in the Torah, we just read it last Shabbos, love your neighbor as yourself, right? And elsewhere also. And then the other thing to say about Akiva is that he's one of the only sages in the Talmud who has a love story about him. So the story of Akiva, which you may be familiar with, is that until the age of 40, he was an ignorant shepherd, did not even know his alphabet. Akiva falls in love with a woman named Rachel. And interestingly enough, and Rachel, the daughter of a very wealthy man named Kalba Savua, Akiva falls in love with her. He wants to marry her, this ignorant shepherd. And she says to him, I won't marry you, you're ignorant. Out of his love for Rachel, he goes to Cheder. He sits down with the 5-year-olds. He learns the alphabet and continues studying until he goes on to become a great scholar. Now, Rachel herself is disowned by her father. She lives in poverty, and Akiva, having exhausted the scholarly opportunities where they are, goes off to a great yeshiva where he studies. Comes back after many years and to see Rachel, his now wife, and he overhears a conversation. This is quite a legend. He overhears a conversation between her and someone else who says, she hasn't yet made an appearance, who says, it's terrible for you. Your husband has been away all these years. And she says, it's fine. If he can learn more, he should be away even more. So he leaves, right? And he finally comes back, and he is escorted by this huge number of students who will follow him anywhere because of his great teaching. And she hears, and she comes out to greet him. And his students go to push her aside, this poor woman. And he says to her, all that I have and all that you have is because of her. Great love story. Stayed away way too long and too many times by modern sensibilities. I don't know. But in the rabbinic mindset, right, of course, for the rabbis, the great love, ironically, is Torah, right? But this is Akiva. And this is the man who looks, who was, according to this legend, so enamored and so in love as early in life that he gave up everything to go and sit, with the kindergartners in order to win the love of his beloved. All right, so controversial, but ultimately makes it into the canon, becomes part of the biblical tradition. Now, what do you do with that? Well, it's in, right? What can we say about this? And what do rabbis say about this erotic book? So there are two general ways of approaching it, neither one of which we're going to do, but there are two general ways of approaching it. And the first is to say that it's really, the whole thing is not to be read literally, right? It's symbolic, and it is symbolic of the relationship between God and the people of Israel. There's a male and a female lover in the poetry. God is the male lover, Israel is the female lover. And in fact, according to this tradition, which goes back, as the earliest we have is in the Targum, which is an early Aramaic translation of the book, the Song of Songs. You can look at various passages and you can point to times in biblical history that those passages are referring to. Right? So that it is a metaphor, it's analogous, it's not to be read literally, right? So that's one approach to it. And by the way, if you go and you get the Art Scroll translation of the Song of Songs, you'll read it, it has nothing to do with the Hebrew. It's this analogy, right? It'll talk about the Exodus, and it'll talk about the Babylonian captivity, talk about all kinds of things. And you would think that that's the translation, because it was the translation of the Targum, and it's wildly different. I always am, every translation is an interpretation. It's true in every book of the Bible. You go from Hebrew to another language. I think I've mentioned this once before, that there's an old saying that reading the Bible in translation is like kissing your beloved through a veil, right? You're not really making contact. Yeah, you're there, but right? So every translation is an interpretation, but the Art Scroll is not a translation at all. But it comes out of this place, very deep in rabbinic literature, that you don't translate this literally. You can't. Now, there is another way to look at it, which is not about the relationship between God and Israel. It's about the relationship between God and me. That is, it's not a national love story, it's an individual love story. And it's about human beings' relationship with God. And that's a kind of mystical interpretation of the text. And so I want to share with you it's all poetry, right? The Song of Songs is all poetry. I want to share with you a different poem, one that is often chanted on Friday nights as part of the liturgy. Written much later, it's written in Spain by a 16th century Kabbalist whose name is Eliezer ben Moshe Azikri, right? But I want you to look at the language and bear it in mind when we think about the Song of Songs. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me do that. Okay, so the poem is called Yedid Nefesh, and it's addressed to God, who is called Beloved of my soul. Draw your surrendered to your will rendered. This is unfortunately not a, it's an attempt to to turn it into a rhyme as poetry, so it's not so literal, but I think you get a sense. My soul's beloved, merciful Father, draw your surrender to your will rendered. You surrender, you're surrendered, that's me, will run like a gazelle. This gazelle image comes from the Song of Songs. He will bow before your splendor, for to him your love is sweeter than dripping honeycomb and any taste at all, right? This is a poem of longing for God, and it uses imagery of love, resplendent, beautiful radiance of the world. My soul is sick for your love, right? Literally, I'm love sick for God. Please, God, heal her, meaning my soul, heal my soul by the beauty of your radiance, by showing her that she will be strong, she will be healed, she will be your handmaiden, right? Handmaiden, right? This is not a servant, this is far more than that. Ancient One, rouse, please, your mercy, have pity on the son of your beloved, for so much has this yearning be to see your strength in its beauty, right? I just yearn to have some contact, to feel you, right? Please, my God, love of my heart. Hurry, please. Do not hide yourself. Please be revealed and spread the covering. This is over us. Beloved, upon me the shelter of your tranquility. Illumine the earth with your nobility. We will rejoice in you. We will be in festivity. Hurry, beloved. The time has come. Be good to me like days long ago. Right? So as you'll see, that poem, that Kabbalist, written by a Kabbalist in the 16th century, which draws on some of the language, as we'll see in the Song of Songs, in fact, represents this kind of thinking, that one can think with great passion and even eros about God. And Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is in some ways an attempt to have a relationship with God that is more than, the Lord and his servant, but it is God as our longed for lover, a love that can never really be consummated, right? But can be approximated. One can draw closer, one can feel God's presence more. Okay, so 2 ways of dealing with this text. It's an allegory for the relationship between God and the people of Israel and can be read historically, or it is an allegory for the yearning of the human soul for the divine. Now, I've said all that. We're not going to look at it that way. Either one of them. We're going to look at it basically in terms of its pshat, in terms of the way it presents itself. Before we do that, I want to elicit your questions or comments about all of this introduction, Sandy.
Yeah, I was surprised to read that Rabbi Akiva was a convert.
No, Rabbi Akiva is not a convert. Rabbi Akiva is a poor Jewish shepherd.
Well, I had read that he was living during the time of the Sanhedrin, right?
Yes.
And there was a vacancy in the Sanhedrin, and they passed him by because that's what I read, that he was a convert.
There must be some text about this, but I am not aware of anything like that, and he's certainly not treated that way. It's hard to believe that he would have been accepted, following this tradition, right? That he would have been accepted into the cheder. It's hard to believe that she, Kalba Sarua, her father, right, Rachel's father, doesn't object to him because he's not Jewish, right? So I don't think so, but I'm not saying it doesn't exist.
All right, thank you.
And I will look into it because I'm surprised by it. Hannah.
Yeah, I have it here in this Tanakh, and there's a note that it's concerning Solomon.
Okay, so we're going to talk about that in just a minute, because the book is titled "The Song of Songs of Solomon."
Oh.
There are some references to Solomon in it, so I'll get to that in just a minute. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay, so if not, I'm going to share my screen again. This time we'll be looking at the text of the Song of Songs. Before we do that, I need to do this. Okay. And now I can put that down. How do I go back? I can go back here. Okay, and now I can share my screen. Okay. Surprisingly, it worked. I don't think I've ever done that, shared 2 texts one after another. Okay, So, Shir HaShirim. Now, Song of Songs means in some way, Shir HaShir is the song of the songs, right? In other words, the greatest of all songs. So, the word song in Hebrew, shir, this might well have been sung. These, they are individual poems that have been brought together. They may well have been sung, but the word song, shirah or shir, really means poem. Sometimes they're sung, sometimes they're not, right? So, but this is the greatest of all collections of poetry. At least that's how it's referred to in the Bible. I don't know that it's meant to be taken literally. It's a superlative, right? And now we get Shir HaShirim Asher LeShlomo, which is Solomon's, or which is by Solomon. It's very difficult to say. Now, so Solomon is a figure who is viewed in several ways. One of which is a source of wisdom, right? And that's why, for example, the book of Ecclesiastes, which is wisdom literature, is also ascribed to Solomon. He's also a great lover who has many, many wives, right? And he's also, if you read in the Book of Kings about Solomon, he also seems to be an expert in the natural world. So given those things, right, it's not surprising that it is ascribed to Solomon. This is part of a tradition of ascribing things to classical figures. By the way, there is one of the Psalms also ascribed, at least one, ascribed to Solomon. Many Psalms ascribed to David, right? This idea of identifying anonymous figures as specific known individuals in the biblical tradition is not uncommon. It's difficult to see this as somehow the work of Solomon, because it refers to Solomon several times, but only in the third person. Doesn't say me, it says King Solomon. Now, I mean, you can say, that a king could refer to himself in the third person. People do that. I just remember dating myself. When Bob Dole was running for president, he would often speak about Bob Dole. Bob Dole does this or Bob Dole does that, when he really means I, right? So it's not impossible. But the broad consensus of modern scholars is that this is a much later attribution, and that Solomon is not really the author of these verses. So what's the scene in the Song of Songs? We have two lovers. It is agricultural. They are shepherds. They spend their time out in nature. And they have this longing, which seems to be consummated, sometimes seems not, goes back and forth. And it is spoken in the first person. Look at the first line. Give me the kisses of your mouth, right? I'm talking to you, right? This is one of the lovers speaking to the other lover, right? And he will speak back to her. And sometimes she'll speak at a long length, and then he will. Sometimes it's a quick back and forth. So it's a lover's dialogue, extremely lush, lyrical, erotic, as we're going to see. Okay. And it opens, look at the way it opens. kiss me, right? This does not sound like the Bible, right? Kiss me, for your love is more delightful than wine. Your ornaments yield a sweet fragrance. Your name is like the finest oil. Here, your name is probably your reputation, right? And it's precious. It's like fine oil which flows, right? And we have here images of oil and also of wine, right? Fine things, things which are delightful. Therefore, do maidens love you, right? You're very popular, right? Not only do I love you, but you are beloved. Draw me after you, let us run. The king has brought me into his chambers. Okay, so is the king Solomon? I don't think so. And really almost no one does. And by the way, if Solomon wrote this would really be bizarre, right? The king, Solomon, has brought me, who am I if I'm Solomon, right? Into his chamber. So here it seems that the king is simply a reference to her beloved. You know, you're my king, you're my prince, right? You're right. And he could say, you're my queen, right? It's more that. Let us delight and rejoice in your love, savoring it more than wine, like new wine they love you. And now she describes herself, and she's now talking to her friends, daughters of Jerusalem. I am dark but comely, dark and beautiful, like the tents of Kedar, like the pillars of Solomon. So she's dark, right? Dark and beautiful. And the tents of Kedar, tents made out of goat skins. You can see this if you go to Israel, in Bedouin encampments. I don't know, these days, maybe they're using more modern materials. I was really struck on a visit to Jerusalem, to Israel many, many years ago, that you would see these Bedouin tents with TV antennas sticking out of them. So I don't know what they make them out of now, but typically tents had this dark wool on them. Pavilions of Solomon. Solomon here, some people think is not actually Solomon. It's Salva, which is a place name. And then don't stare at me because I'm swarthy, because the sun gazed upon me. My mother's sons quarreled with me, her brothers, and they made me guard the vineyards. So I'm out in the sun all day long. That's why I look like this. My own vineyard I did not guard. Now, it seems, and you can read it as you like, that the vineyard here seems to be a reference to her chastity, her sexuality. She didn't guard it. She opened it up. And now she asks him, tell me, you who I love so well, where do you pasture your sheep? Where do you rest them at noon? I want to go. Where are you? Right? I'm coming to visit, right? Where do you rest? Where do you lie down? Let me not be as one who strays beside the flock of your fellows. Okay, and now here we have a switch, right? She's been talking, now he'll talk. If you do not know, O fairest of women, go follow the tracks of the sheep and graze your kids by the tents of the shepherd. And now he's talking about her. She says, you'll find me, right? Follow the tracks. How else could he really tell her? I have likened you, my darling, to a mare in Pharaoh's chariots. Right, the horses of Egypt are the finest horses in the world, right? Solomon is told, don't return to Egypt after horses. Of course he does, kings are not supposed to do that. He does. And we have this famous archaeological ruin attributed to Solomon's stables in the south of Israel, right? And there were crowns in antiquity on horses. They were adorned. We see this in the book of Esther, by the way. You remember when Mordecai, Haman says to Achashverosh, wakes up, remembers that he owes Haman something. Owes Mordecai something, who had actually saved his life from a plot. And Achashverosh wakes up, Haman is there, Haman's about to kill Mordecai on the gallows, and king says, what should be done to the man I want to honor? Haman thinks it's himself, and he says, may he be dressed in the king's clothes, ride on the king's horse, and wear the crown. If you look at ancient depictions of the book of Esther, illustrations, it's the crown, the horse that's wearing the crown. But this is a way that animals were adorned, particularly royal animals. So a mare among Pharaoh's chariots, right, a very fine horse, that sounds a little, you're like a beautiful horse. I don't know, but we're going to see, it just means you're exceptional. And you have your cheeks are comely, your neck with strings of jewels, and we will add wreaths of gold gold to your spangles of silver. While the king was on his couch, and now we're back to her again, right? He's lying down. My nard gave forth its fragrance, right? This is spice. My beloved to me is like a bag of myrrh lodged between my breasts. Right? Imagine this woman, she has a bag of this perfume. We have this image of her breasts, and in between her breasts is this fragrance, and he is like that in between her breasts, right? Very erotic. And then my beloved is to me a spray of henna blooms from the vineyards of Ein Gedi. Right? Very lush. Ein Gedi, of course, an oasis in the wilderness. Ah, you are fair, my darling. Ah, you are fair with your dove-like eyes. And you, my beloved, are handsome, right? She says he's fair. He says she's fair. She says he's handsome. Beloved indeed, our couch is a bower. Cedars are the beams of our house. Cypress the rafters, right? So they're out in nature, making love to each other or with each other, or how, it's all clothed, but it's really quite explicit. I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valley, like a lily among the thorns, so is my darling among the maidens, right? His description of her, right? Think of a rose bush, thorny rose bush, but in the middle, right? The other women are all thorns, and she is a beautiful flower, like an apple tree among the forest, so is my beloved among the youths. I sit in his shade, his fruit is sweet in my mouth. He brought me to the banquet room, his banner of love was over me, sustained me with raisin cakes, refreshed me with apples. I am faint with love. His left hand was under my head, his right hand embraced me. I adjure you, O maidens of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or hinds of the field. Do not wake or rouse love to it, please. Hark, my beloved, here he comes, leaping over mountains, bounding over hills. He's a gazelle or a young stag, and he stands beyond our wall, gazing through the window, peering through the lattice, right? So yearning for union, and yet he's beyond the wall. He's looking through. We're going to see this more explicitly shortly. My beloved, speak to me. Arise, my darling, my fair one, right? He say, get up, come out, right? Why? The winter is past and the rain's over and gone. The blossoms have appeared in the land. The time of pruning has come. The song of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The green figs form on the fig tree. The vines in their blossom gives off fragrance. Arise, my darling, come away. This is why it's read on Passover. Passover is Chag HaAviv, right? The holiday of spring. And here we get imagery of spring, right? So if you want to think now, I think there's another reason also, and that goes really back to that more mystical explanation of this as being the relationship between God and Israel. There is a tradition, strong rabbinic tradition, that Mount Sinai is the place where God marries Israel. Right? The Torah is our ketubah. We make a covenant with God at Mount Sinai. That's in the Torah. So what kind of covenant is it? It's a kind of wedding covenant, right? I'll talk about this more next time. And that's why the prophets, the whole idea of idolatry looks like infidelity, right? It's like very explicit in the prophet Hosea, who compares Israel, who's married, a man speaks about, he speaks to his wife, who has become a whore and who has born illegitimate children with somebody else, right? All of that imagery of marriage on Sinai, we find in rabbinic tradition and maybe even in biblical tradition. And then this is the beginning of that process. This is the point with God takes Israel to himself or to God's self, which will ultimately lead to Sinai and to their wedding. I think that's less strong. I think that really the idea why we read it on Passover is Chag HaAviv, the holiday of spring, and all of this explicit spring-like liturgy language makes it appropriate. Okay, I'm gonna run ahead just a bit. You should recognize this. My beloved is mine and I am his, who browse among the lilies. When the day, right? Dodi li va'anilo, right? My beloved is mine and I am his. There are people who put this on their rings, their wedding rings, right? Sometimes I've done wedding ceremonies where the groom will say the traditional words, behold, you are betrothed to me as my wife, according to the laws of Moses and the people of Israel. He will say that to her, and she will say to him, Dodi li va'anilo, my beloved is mine. There is later on in this poem, another phrase, which is sometimes used on wedding rings. Beth and I used it on our rings, and it is, place me as a seal upon your heart, right? So this becomes, Song of Songs, becomes sort of the basis for all kinds of things. So, on my couch at night, I sought the one I love him. I sought him, but did not find him. I must rise and roam the town through the streets and through the squares. I must seek him, but I found him not. And I passed the white, she's out in the streets now. She wants him. It's dangerous. You don't go around in the streets at night. I met the watchmen who patrol the town. Scarcely had I found, have you seen him? Scarcely had I passed them, and I found the one I love. I held him fast, would not let him go. Brought him to my mother's house, to the chamber of hers who conceived me, right? Now he's speaking. Who is she that comes from the desert in clouds of myrrh and frankincense? And let me just jump ahead. You are fair, my darling. Oh, you are fair. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of ghosts. Your teeth are like a flock of ewes climbing up the washing pool. Your lips are a crimson. I mean, this is right. This is describing her physical beauty. Your neck like a Tower of David. Your breasts like two fawns. When the day blows gently and the shadows flee, I betake me to the mountain of myrrh, to the hill of frankincense. Every part of you is fair. There is no blemish on you. Come with me, from Lebanon. You have captured my heart. You have captured my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one coil of your necklace. And it goes on and on. Here, sweetness drops from your lips, milk and honey under your tongue. A garden locked is my own, my bride, a fountain locked, a sealed up spring. And then we get myrrh, nard, saffron. So awake, O north wind, come south wind, blow upon my garden. Let my beloved come into his garden and enjoy its luscious fruits. That's about as erotic as it gets. Right? Enjoy its luscious fruits. I have come to my garden. I have plucked my myrrh and spice, eaten my honey and honeycomb, drunk my wine and my milk. Eat, lovers, and drink deep of love. Now, we have another scene. I was asleep, but my heart was wakeful. Hence my beloved, hark my beloved knocks. So again, it's at night. Before she woke up and went looking for him, now she is in bed, she's asleep, and he comes. Right? Dodi dofek. I hear the sound of my beloved knocking. Joseph Soloveitchik, one of the great, actually probably the greatest leader of modern Orthodox Jewry in his time. By the way, quite a liberal figure in some ways. He created a yeshiva in Boston where my son studied at one time, and boys studied Talmud together with girls in the same class. You never see that today. At any rate, Soloveitchik wrote a very famous essay about longing for God. It's called Kol Dodi Dofek, the sound of my beloved knocking. So you can see that these phrases get used again and again. And just a little bit more, and then I'm going to turn to something else. I was asleep, but my heart was wakeful. My beloved knocks, let me in. My head is drenched with dew, my locks with the damp of night. And now she says, I had taken off my robe. Was I going to put it on again? I had bathed my feet. Am I going to get them dirty? He's knocking, and she's like, oh. My beloved took his hand off the latch. My head was stirred for him. I rose to my beloved. I opened the door, but he had turned and gone. Right? He knocked, she got up, he's gone. I sought him but found him not. I called, but he did not answer. And she goes out. And this time when she meets the watchman, they strike her and bruise her and strips her cloak off of her. And looking for the word. She's willing to allow this to happen if she can only get close to him. And it goes on and on like this. And actually, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to stop the share. I do want to say a word about how this is used liturgically, not only on Passover, but actually, if you were a Sephardic Jew, at least in some communities, they don't do what Ashkenazic Jews do. There's no lechadodi. They don't do any of that. What they do is to chant the Song of Songs. Because Shabbat is also viewed as a kind of union between God and the people of Israel. When the conservative movement came out with its latest prayer book, in the Kabbalat Shabbat service, in the Friday night service, there are passages from the Song of Songs which can be read either alongside of the traditional Psalms or in addition to them. So it's not only on Passover, it's really can be used every Shabbat of the year. Okay, so I hope that I've enhanced your understanding of it. I urge you to read it. Don't read it in Art Scroll. You won't get it. Any questions or comments before we leave? Anything at all? We do have 5 minutes, so. All right, well, so yeah, Marilyn, Myra. You're muted. You're muted. No? Here, see if I can unmute you. Okay. Myra, you are muted. You just need to unmute. All right, let me see if I can unmute you. Hold on. I think maybe I can. No, all I can do is, I am sorry, I cannot unmute you.
Myra, look. Oh, I was going to tell her how.
I don't, can you hear me, Myra? If you could hear me, nod. Okay, so you should see where if you go all the way on the bottom of your screen, all the way to your left, you'll see a little microphone. Do you see that on the bottom of your screen?
Move your cursor there.
Move your cursor to the bottom of your screen. And then look all the way to the left. And you will see a little microphone. Okay. So I want, if you have a question, Myra, email me and I will answer it. Okay? I thought I saw one other hand. Did I? Okay. Yes, Barry.
He's muted.
Unmute. Yeah, I see some similarity with Shakespeare.
Yeah, sure. Who undoubtedly knew the Song of Songs, right? So, yeah, I mean, this is profound poetry, right? So yes, and if you look at the sonnets, particularly, Sandy.
Rabbi, if you click on participants and you go to Myra, you should be able to unmute her. Did you try that?
I did that.
Did I unmute myself?
You did.
Absolutely.
Congratulations. Go ahead.
No, what I wanted to say, I wanted to say two things. One, when he talks about dark, you are dark. And they say it's not from Solomon, but wasn't the Queen of Sheba considered dark? And
Because of where she comes from, yes, but she's never described as a queen. And in fact, the reason for her darkness is given, right? Because she's been out in the fields. So it doesn't seem like it could be a reference to the Queen of Sheba, whose skin pigmentation is dark. And
yeah, and my next question is not for the Song of Songs, but what made a prophet? I mean, somebody could come along and say, I'm a prophet. What made somebody a real prophet?
okay, I am going to talk about that, but not now. First of all, because
okay.
no, but I'll tell you when. Because the one book that we are going to look at, which is not part of the 5 scrolls, which we will look at in 2 weeks, is the book of Jonah. So hold it for 2 weeks, and you will hear what makes a prophet. And here's a teaser, why Jonah is a very bad prophet.
Thank you.
All right. All right. I wish you all.
I wanted to say, I think it's more like the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. That's what it sounds like.
Yes, good.
Very,
Yeah, very similar.
come live with me and be my love, it's there.
Excellent. Yes. Okay. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week, come back and we are going to read the book of Ruth, and that will be in time for Shavuot. This is the one that really we are in sync with, and when it will be read in its entirety. Have a great week. Hope
You
to see
too.
You.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.